in the shtibel I went to as a kid, they passed the smelling salts. But people knew this was l'shem shemayim. Standing is not l'shem shemayim. That's my whole point. If it said, "V'taldu kimat kol yom kippur," if that was a mitzvah, then I would have to do it. But it is not. And Rabbi Adlerstein said in his own shul, he told the people, it's not a halacha to stand during a niyula. But it is. But people feel social pressure to do so. Unless you're aged or in a wheelchair, you feel you have to, and it has that. All I'm saying is, and I know the argument, if as soon as you drop one, the whole edifice falls. But that's what the ultra-frum, if you're not ultra-frum, could say to you. I asked an ultra-frum rabbi that I know, do you wake up every night like the Shulchan Aruch says, and do you mourn the destruction of the Beis Mikdash? That's in the Shulchan Aruch. Do you believe masturbation is murder? That's in the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, there's no end to this. There are dangers in both ways. There are dangers if you drop, and there's dangers if you don't drop. And that's so you have to have enough emunah. That's the whole point. I'm saying enough bitachon, that if you do change something rabbinic, you are not violating what the ritzon of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's the only argument I'm making. So you take it from here.
It's one of these times that you want to invoke the oldest of Jewish jokes. You know, you're right, you're also right. I would not completely dismiss the attitude of the last questioner. It comes from a good place. You cannot gainsay the value of what we call emunah pshuta, of believing from the depth of your heart. Torah is emes, Moshe emes, the Torah emes. And that our Masorah is valid, and I needn't question beyond that. I would not for a second disparage anybody who comes from such a place. I would also argue that it is one of the hardest things to transmit in an open society. It does far better behind some closed walls, and none of us live behind those walls. For us, we are a community that does have to ask questions, that does have to examine our interaction with other people, and therefore inviting Dennis today, I think, was one of the wisest moves we could have made. I also think that to 90% of the people in this room, either they'll listen to your challenges, Dennis, and say, that's ridiculous, I know the difference, in which case nothing is lost. I'll say, that's a good question, and I know exactly where I have to go to find the answer. Baruch Hashem. Lo Alam Yisrael, we have people who can give answers for all of those questions, and if you have those questions, then you deserve answers and should go for them. And I forgot the rest of what I was going to say.
I want to add something that you could now use by having had me to Reform friends. Reform does not invite me. Conservative did. I spoke at the Rabbinic Assembly Convention in Houston. They differed with me, especially on the same-sex marriage issue. But that's fine. They invited me. You invited me. Reform. And you know why Reform? This is so fascinating. And I go to Stephen S. Wise, which is a Reform shul. It's a minyan, a special minyan. And if you went in there, you'd think it's conservative, but you wouldn't go in there. By the way, my parents went in. Interestingly, my parents did go for my younger son's bar mitzvah. And they loved it. And they have been Orthodox for all 88 of their 88 years. So it's a very interesting reaction, both to their credit and to Armenians' credit. But in any event, you have exhibited by having me here greater strength of conviction and greater openness of mind than so-called liberal Jews. And why won't Reform have me? This is what's so fascinating. Because of my politics. Not because of my Judaism, not because of my theology, because of my politics. Because as you move leftward in Jewish life, politics is religion. For most Jews outside of Orthodoxy, not all, most, liberalism is their Torah. That's very important to understand. So a Jew who is a Republican is an utter apikoros. They are as frum as you are. To understand your fellow Jew, your fellow non-Orthodox liberal Jew, you must understand they are as frum as you are, but their religion isn't Judaism as much as it is secular liberalism. That's what needs to be understood. You have the ability to be more open. I gave the example, the same thing, this is general, liberals think they're open-minded. It is so untrue. It is one of the great myths of our civilization. I was invited by a Christian evangelical radio station 20 years ago to sit in for their host, not to be a guest, to be the guest host on a Christian station, a Jew practicing, not like you, but practicing, observant, believing, not in Jesus, not in the New Testament, is allowed to be the guest. I announced this on radio and said KPFK would never even have me as a guest because they are not open. The right-wing Christians are more open than left-wing secularists. And KPFK finally invited me on a show because the thought that I had proof that right-wing evangelical Christians were more open-minded than they was too painful. But you have proved that today, and you can tell this to your friends to the left of you.
I just remembered. But first, my parallel anecdote to that is that a few months ago with Rabbi Cooper, I accompanied a group of 11 Presbyterian friends to Israel, and we were with them for a week, trying to prime them before the General Assembly, where they were going to take the lead in trying to undo divestment. And most of the week we didn't talk theology, but towards the end of the week they got comfortable enough that they started asking all the questions. The second you come for a cause, the second it was all there. And I spent a good deal of time with them fielding all of their questions. We had more time than we had here. I will not forget, despite having made a completely different impression of talking just about values or whatever, I spoke about the nitty-gritty of halacha and why I thought it was so necessary. We got off the bus, and one fellow says to me, says, you know, Rabbi, I don't know, every time I speak to you, you seem to have like some good advice and some good insight. I have come to the conclusion that every Presbyterian minister ought to have himself an Orthodox rabbi. I do disagree with you 1,000% about standing up. Standing up should not be done out of social pressure. It should be done, and we don't do it that many days a year. We do it in the Yom Noraim, when we focus on the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Melech Malchei HaMlachim, the absolute kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you do get up for a king. And you would stand up for hours to be in the presence of a good, beneficent king. When you understand it that way, and understand that it's not halacha, it is not a burden at all. And if it's a burden, you should know halacha that you can sit down. I'm in enough trouble as it is for coming here, so I will get further into trouble by telling you that many of you know who my own personal love is, certainly one of the greatest balei halacha in town. I delight in remembering a time when he paskined something in public, and somebody came over, running over with a Shulchan Aruch, and pointing to a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram said the opposite. He said, Nachal Mahachmir. And he said, Rabbi, you're wrong. And he said, all right. He said, you're wrong. Magen Avram says it. No, he says, the Magen Avram says, I'm right. So what do you mean? He says, Nachal Mahachmir. He says, yes. Nachal Mahachmir means it's appropriate to be Machmir, but it's a chumrah. If you don't want to be Machmir, then know what the halacha is. 99% of the questions that we have, difficulties with halacha, come from not being able to put halacha in its proper sequence, knowing the difference between a d'oraisa, the rabbanon, something that's accepted by everything, something that's accepted in Shulchan Aruch, because a majority or a close to majority. One of the first things I teach my law students at Loyola Law School is that this is one of the great things about halacha, that we have a way of taking competing values and putting in a framework and knowing what trumps what. And yes, there are things, including the quality of one's own davening, that will trump standing in the Eilah. But if you don't know it, It's not the fault of Torah. As Shakespeare once said, get thee to a base medrash.